Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 235, season 5, episode 22, Beyond Sinai, number 4, the last in our series called Beyond Sinai. Today, the legacy of leadership, how great leaders build what lasts. We have talked about this subject before, but we're going to talk about it again in the context of this Beyond Sinai series. I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend ahead. Just because I keep now thinking about it, remembering it, on Spotify, on YouTube, wherever it is that you listen to these podcasts or other platforms, by all means, definitely subscribe and like and share if you enjoy the episode. If there's a nugget of information, of wisdom that you feel is valuable and might be meaningful to somebody else, by all means, share it with them. Share the podcast with other people. Growing the audience is really important to me, not simply just to have a large audience, just because I like to share the ideas and I want the ideas that I'm thinking through and that I'm sharing and that I'm presenting to find their audience and to find people who are interested in them. And so we can learn together and grow together and continue to move forward together. So episode 235, the legacy of leadership. At this point in the Beyond Sinai journey, really everything is in place. Session 1, we laid the foundation. We moved from Moses as the personal leader to a structured system with delegation and clear blueprints for execution. In Session 2, we learned how to activate the people, getting buy-in and their sense of ownership, ensuring that the mission was carried by many and not the few. And in Session 3 last week, we explored how leaders must show up, how they embody accountability, how they bring empathy and focus, wearing the weight of responsibility, not just on their shoulders, but also on their hearts. We talked about garments. We've talked about the contributions of the many. We've talked about the leadership of others before. We even talked about how Jethro came along and introduced a decentralized hierarchical system to the political leadership and the legal leadership. But the truth is, all those things are not the destination. They are the preparation. And leadership doesn't end with the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, or dressing up the high priest. That moment, full of symbolism and emotion, is still only what I'll call, quote unquote, almost. The real test is what happens next. Will the leadership endure beyond the leader? Will the values hold when the thunder, quote unquote, of the experience is gone? Will the mission live when Moses steps back or Moses steps away or when there's somebody else in the role? That's what Session 4 is about. The final and most important shift, when we go from leadership as a moment in time to leadership as a movement, when we go from sacred space as a structure to sacred space now as a system. We'll talk deeply about that. I think it's really great. And we'll talk about when Moses and Aaron, as figures of authority, step aside and successors step in to carry on the legacy. Because this is where we learn how great leaders build what lasts, how they turn this purpose into culture and this culture into what we'll call continuity. And this might be the most important lesson of all, because Revelation is only the beginning. The Sinai moment, that super high moment for the people, for Moses, obviously, the receiving of the Ten Commandments, the revelation of Sinai, the beginning of the covenant is only the beginning. And what you build afterward is what makes it real. And then what you build even for the long term, what sustains it, makes it something meaningful for generations and generations and generations. And so in this episode, the legacy of leadership, we're going to talk about 4 pillars once again. Pillar number 1 is going to be the power of rituals, where we embed the values into daily and regular practice. Pillar 2, we're going to talk about the role of successors, because that's a crucial aspect of how you build long-term legacy. Pillar 3 is going to be the power of shared space, where we're designing community through the environment. We're going to bring back James Clear, who we haven't spoken about in a long time. And in Pillar 4, the discipline of letting go, when you have to now trust the mission beyond your presence. And that is that period of time in the aftermath of the change from Moses to Joshua, from Aaron to his children, and then beyond. Pillar one, the power of rituals, embedding values into daily practice. So in the final chapters of Exodus, we read about the completion of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. That's the Hebrew term we use. The people bring all the components to Moses. Every piece is now in place. Every instruction is fulfilled. The construction is complete. Then at last, the presence of God fills the space. But what's critical is what happens after the completion. The Mishkan is not just a structure, it becomes the center of daily ritual life. Priests are performing the regular offerings. Incense is burned morning and evening. Lamps, the menorah, the candelabra is kindled every single day. The space is maintained and it's activated through daily, weekly, monthly, and even yearly practices. Because you don't build a legacy and you can't build that movement through a single act. You build it through the rituals. Some might call them habits, but I think ritual is more than habit, that makes these values repeatable, visible, and livable on a regular and consistent basis. This is important. This is why this matters, because big visions inspire, but the rituals sustain it. Rituals are what make these values and make these visions stick. They transform these cultures from ideas into behaviors. And without the ritual, the team forgets, the mission fades, the legacy disappears to nothing. And therefore, what's important to appreciate from a theoretical standpoint, we've talked about this before. I could easily go James Clear right here. I'm going to bring him somewhere else. I'm going to bring in something called the habit loop, which appears in the book by Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit. The habit loop is that rituals create cues and rewards that encode behavior. When leaders tie values to consistent rituals, they're building cultures effortlessly over time, because the culture is built in the day-to-day, in the habituation and ritualization of the day-to-day. It's not built in the offsites and the gala events. The culture is built in the daily, weekly, monthly check-ins and the reflections of the team. That's how that works. And when we do it that way, you get great success over the course of time, over the long haul. Habitualizing and then ritualizing the day-to-day activities gets you, obviously, closer to perfection, but really more importantly, as I always like to say from the hip-hop preacher Eric Thomas, it gets you closer to permanence. Here's a great example. If you look at any military corps, the morning ritual, the morning reveille is the term that they use, certainly in the United States at the Marine Corps. Every base in the Marine Corps begins the day with the raising of the flag and the playing of the national anthem. The daily ritual connects soldiers to the larger mission and to the bigger identity, even before, quote unquote, the real work begins. This is how you ritualize and habitualize and regularize. That's not a term, but that's a term we're going to use here. The mission, the vision, the actions in the day-to-day, week-to-week. It becomes effectively part of the DNA because of the ritualized and habitualized time that's there. And so when you're looking at your organization, institution, family, whatever it is where you're the leader, ask yourself the questions that we always like to ask ourselves in these spaces, which is, what are the rituals in my organization that are consistently reinforcing our core values? Am I modeling those rituals myself, or am I delegating culture to chance or to others? If I left tomorrow, would the culture continue, or does it simply rest with me and therefore die with me and effectively disappear with me? These questions help the leader improve the culture that they're trying to create. You can talk about having the 9 a.m. stand-up, but if you're the leader and not there at the 9 a.m. stand-up, it isn't worth very much. So it has to become codified and ritualized. The morning huddle, like I just mentioned, the weekly wins meeting, the Slack channel that regularly honors a member of a team. There's something I saw about a television show. I don't even know the name of the television show. I saw this on, maybe it was on Twitter or somewhere else, that when they bring a guest on every day, the team that works at the show lines up and everybody dances that person to the studio. That's a ritual. It's a habit, but it's cultural and it goes deep to the core of what's going to be. And that is fundamental to what's going to be over the long term. So that's pillar number one here, is habitualizing and ritualizing behaviors which go beyond simply just the build. But what about the leadership itself? What happens when you're no longer there? Like we mentioned in that last question, if I left tomorrow. In the next pillar, we explore succession, the essential leadership discipline of preparing others to lead. Now, we have talked about succession. We specifically talked about succession. Maybe this was year one of coaching the Bible. Maybe it was year two of coaching the Bible. When it is that Moses has to make the determination, or God makes the determination with Moses as to who's going to follow in his shoes. It's come up also in the course of our conversations, but in other places as well, when there is the rebellion in the camp, when they're questioning Moses' leadership and effectively questioning who's going to be in charge when Moses is no longer around. In the case that we want to focus in on today is not Joshua as the follow-up to Moses. I want to sit inside the space of the tabernacle, specifically around the children of Aaron. Because the core idea here is that legacy leadership doesn't happen in the moment of transition. It happens in the years before. It is a painstaking and meticulous and relentless effort over time to get that legacy leadership space right. Building leadership legacy requires more than appointing a replacement. It's about preparing people long before they're needed, and not just preparing them with skills, but with identity, clarity, and trust. We talked at the time about the idea of promoting from within, of succession from within, the idea that I mentioned at the time that one of the greatest things that Moses did, or that God did for the people, was that he had Joshua ready to take over. Yes, there's always a learning period that goes on there, but Joshua was there. It wasn't like they had to go in an interview process and look for somebody outside the camp. They hired from within. Same thing happens with the priests. They hire from within. The person who takes over for Aaron upon his demise at the end of the Bible, spoiler alert, is his own son Eleazar. He inherits the priesthood not through ceremony alone, but through years of immersive training, shadowing, and participation. He is there from the beginning because legacy is not passed down through speeches. It's passed through proximity. The leaders of tomorrow are built today by walking alongside you, serving faithfully with you, and observing the culture through their own lived experience with your tutelage. And so the sons of Aaron and the Levitical families, because that's how that is passed down, become leaders through their embedded presence. They serve, they prepare, they participate, they practice, they are always ready. So when the moment comes, they simply have to step in. Eleazar doesn't need to be taught what to do. He's lived it. The Levites don't need to be trained in rituals. Yes, there's a training period for all the youngest people who come into the camp to be into that space, to be part of the serving family in the tabernacle, in the temple later on. But they're doing it all along, because this key insight here is if we want these things, these missions to become movements and these movements to last, the succession of the mission isn't just about who leads next. It's about whether the next leader already lives the mission internally. So here's a great theory. This comes from someone by the name of Etienne Wenger in a presentation called Communities of Practice. Learning occurs through participation in a community where meaning, identity, and leadership are developed over time. True succession, this is the application, isn't transactional. It's participatory and formational. You don't give someone a title and hope they figure it out. You grow them in real time through shared work, ongoing feedback, and relational trust. When we talked about it at the time, we talked about the idea that Joshua was there. Joshua was always there. Aaron's sons are always there. They are present for all the big moments, all the big decisions, all the right decisions, all the mistakes that are made. They have lived it, they have learned it, and they can step in when necessary. So it's a great example. We could always go military here too, but a great example that comes from the company called Pixar. They have something that's called the storytelling bench. The future directors at Pixar begin as story artists and editors. Over years, they internalize not only creative technique, but Pixar's cultural storytelling ethos. There's something unique about the way Pixar tells stories and the culture of how they tell the stories. By the time they become directors, they're fully fluent in both form and philosophy. This is also actually true in the religious community, in the Jewish community, with places of study, yeshivot, they're called in Hebrew. Pretty much, in most cases, everybody knows who's going to be the person who takes over for the person who's in charge now, right? When that person passes away, please God, at the ripe old age of 120, someone's going to take over. But we pretty much always know who that's going to be. It's rarely a surprise who that's going to be. And so the active steps for the leaders now is to create the shadowing opportunities for those people, is to think about it now. I think I mentioned at the time that succession begins to happen when success starts to happen and not later. Don't wait. So creating shadowing opportunities for people to participate in. Mentoring quietly, but intentionally. So it doesn't have to be an out loud statement, you're the next person, but over the course of time, mentoring moments, teachable moments, learning moments for the people who you maybe have identified already as potentially those people going in. You can delegate identity-driven work. You can let the future leaders carry on not just tasks, but responsibility. Give them the space to lead where they can succeed in those smaller spaces. And so you, leader, have to ask yourself the basic questions. Am I creating leaders who know what I do or why I do it? Have I identified someone who is consistently living our mission already, even without a title? I'll throw in a question that my uncle used to talk about when he was hiring, which was, could I work for this person? Look at the team of people that are available to you right now and ask that same question. Is anyone on this team ready to lead? And if they had to lead right now, could I work for them? I think that's a super powerful question that you can ask. And so the final thought here for pillar 2 here is when the sons of Aaron put on the garments, when the son of Aaron puts on the garments, I read that wrong. I have this written down because it's such a good line. He doesn't become the high priest at that point. He reveals that he already is. This is the essence of really important sustainable leadership. Succession is not as a crisis response. Succession is a long-term cultivation, and it's rooted in service, identity, and their presence already there, which brings us into pillar number 3, which is the power of shared space. The power of shared space is really crucial here to think about how we build legacy as well, because I think it's something that perhaps we might overlook. Because here's a core idea. Great leaders don't just build people, they build places. Yes, there are great ideas, and the great leaders have great ideas, and they implement on great ideas, and they execute on great ideas. But they also create the environment for other people to lead and for other people to succeed. Leadership is not just about vision and values, it's about environments. The Mishkan, the tabernacle, wasn't just a portable sanctuary. It was a space of orientation. It was a center of gravity, and it was a container for shared identity. It was a focal point for the community. It was placed at the center of the camp. In the final chapters of Exodus, and then again at the opening of Numbers, the Israelites don't just receive laws, they receive a spatial system. That's the term I want you to think about. It's a spatial system. It's not out of space, it's spatial. They learn how they're going to travel. They learn how they're going to encamp. They learn where they exist and how they're going to coexist in space in real time and in real places. And they learn what that looks like with the tabernacle at the center. The place then becomes a place of practice. The space then itself becomes symbolic, and the environment becomes a space where they can identify. It's dynamic. It is communal. And because the Mishkan is at the heart of the camp, at the center of the people, each tribe, even in the designated formation, are all facing inward towards that sanctuary. It is the guiding light, the center post, the appreciation that worship is central, that unity and community has structure, that the leadership can radiate and does radiate from a shared presence and from a shared space. It also helps to appreciate the idea that there is a sacred rhythm and a spiritual alignment. And that when a person is not spiritually aligned, when the community is not aligned, they don't have congruence between the parts, it's fractured and it's broken. And it includes the places where people sleep, the places where people congregate, the places where people eat, and obviously the places where people gather to worship and to pray and to come together as a community. All those things are part of it. And this is where I bring in James Clear from Atomic Habits. We mentioned many, many times in the course of coaching the Bible. Environment, he said, is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior. Now, he is known for the idea of how to make habits into rituals and how to then therefore change the person's behavior and to change the person over time. And he talks about systems, that we fall to the quality of our systems, but he also very much often talks about environment. Leaders who want sustainable behavior must build spaces that reinforce the values they preach. Culture is more effectively shaped by what surrounds us than by what is said once. Again, culture is more effectively shaped by what surrounds us than by what was said one time. Think about the spaces in which you operate. Think about the spaces that you create for the people who are serving the mission or serving the movement that you want. If it is a massively cluttered space, if it is the space of a hoarder, it doesn't work. If there's no space, there's no place to congregate, there's no place to get together, it also doesn't work. Even, and I mentioned that specifically in a time where virtual and remote spaces are a thing, they have to still find places to congregate. So in a real world example, famously, the Apple Park campus out in California was designed for serendipity, actually. So they insisted on a central atrium in Apple's headquarters. I don't know if that's still true. That certainly was true at the time, to encourage the unexpected collaboration across departments. The space itself created additional connection and thereby, by extension, additional creativity. That's true, as I mentioned, with respect to work environments today, even the remote work environments, where you have the idea of almost like the new water machine or the new coffee machine or the new space where teams gather. It may not be in a physical space in an office or in a conference room. It might be in what some call, quote unquote, the new campfire. When you get together for the morning check-in, when you get together for the weekly team meeting and you're doing it over Zoom, like I'm doing this, but over some virtual space, that still can help to create the environment that you're looking for. And so as the leader, you want to ask yourself these questions. Is the environment I've created aligned with the values I claim to lead with? Does my team know where the center in quotes, the center of our mission is physically or symbolically? Where are we located? Can they appreciate where the roots are? Are we intentional about how we use our space to foster connection, to foster clarity, and to create accountability? And so as a leader, you can take certain action steps. You can center the center. I think that's a great way to put it. Identify and invest in the symbolic heart of your team or your organization. What is your tabernacle? What is your Mishkan? What is the place that holds the most purpose for your team? Relatedly, you can create what we'll call ritual spaces, almost the church, the synagogue, the mosque for your not even your religious space, for your organizational communal space. You can build time and space for that alignment. You can gather together where you can create moments together where you foster bonding and you foster environment. So the last thing then here is that the Mishkan was more than a place to worship. The tabernacle was more than simply a place to worship. It was a place to become. And leaders must move beyond their ideas only and into spaces that embody those ideas, which takes us to pillar number 4, the discipline of letting go. You have to trust the mission beyond your own presence. Well, we talked about the idea of successors and succession. The greatest, perhaps, view that you have succeeded as a leader isn't proven in the moment in which you're commanding. It's proven in the moment when you're no longer there. Can the mission continue without you? Will your people rise to the moment in your silence, in your absence? As the book of Exodus closes, something stunning happens. Moses steps back. The tabernacle is complete. Yes, he had a role to play in it, but he wasn't the contributor of all the materials. He's not going to be the one to run it on a day-to-day basis. He doesn't fill it. God fills it. And this is not a failure. And this is not a breach of the system. This is, in fact, how it's meant to be. Meaning, this is legacy. The legacy here is that Moses has had a hand in creating this incredibly powerful, spiritual, centered, focused environment space that he will not manage day to day, that he will not play a role in on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, but he had a hand in crafting it. He had a hand in building it. That's legacy. The people complete it. The people work it. The people participate. The people own it. And they don't need Moses for it to execute properly. They've internalized the vision. They've implemented it with great precision. And they've earned Moses' blessing and not his correction. When it's all said and done, when it's put together, yes, Moses has a role in actually fashioning the actual buildings together. Moses blesses the people. And now what you have is this real completion of the shift from the charismatic personality to the communal space and communal continuity. And from a leadership theory standpoint, this is Marshall Goldsmith, who I love to talk about, and his great book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Leaders who succeed often hold on too long to control, too long to their roles that previously served them, but which now really limit the organization's growth. Letting go is often the last skill a great leader must learn because legacy requires humility. It requires appreciation that this is going to outlast me, that it's going to be okay in the hands of someone else. And it's not easily come by for a leader to learn the skill of letting go, to learn the skill of being the person who no longer sits in the chair. I remember many, many, many years ago, I may have mentioned this in that episode on succession, when the rabbi at my synagogue retired. And the new rabbi took his place. He had been the rabbi for 40 years, something like that. And the new rabbi replaced him, who, by the way, also was the rabbi for 40 years. It's an amazing thing. But the way in which he handled no longer being in the chair was an incredible lesson in the humility and an incredible lesson in appreciating that it was in good hands and that letting go was important, was a skill to learn, was a skill to implement on, and it showed trust in what was coming next. And so here's an example from the modern world of Howard Schultz, who we mentioned last week. After years of being the brand's face, Howard Schultz steps aside as the CEO of Starbucks. This is 2018. Not because he had nothing left to offer, but because the systems and the culture that he had built can now thrive without him. It is a legacy of leadership in succession and sustainability that goes beyond the person. And so, leader, ask yourself the following questions as we come to the close here of Beyond Sinai number 4, and then close out the series of Beyond Sinai. If I stepped away tomorrow, would my mission thrive or fall apart? Am I holding on to control out of habit, ego, or fear? Have I created the proper structures, the proper values, and the great people that can live and that can lead beyond me? And so, as you're thinking about those questions, think about the idea that you can build self-sufficiency into the system. Don't build the systems that rely on you to function. Teach people to fish, famously, and then you can literally walk off the dock at that point. Create space that shows the separation, shows the moment when you are giving over trust, when you're giving over the mantle, when you're handing over the leadership. And do so with great sense of belief and trust, confidence and comfort, and not out of anxiety. That you're calm in the transition to the new person. Because letting go is not a sign of weakness. It's the final, most courageous act of leadership. Moses, in many senses, doesn't build the Mishkan. He doesn't build a tabernacle, but he does bless it. And then he steps back, and God's presence fills the place. True leadership is knowing when to lead, when to empower, when to step aside, so that something perhaps even greater can emerge. And that is the legacy of leadership. That is Beyond Sinai. And in that last point, a great quote that we mentioned before from John Quincy Adams, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. And that is Beyond Sinai, the story arc that we've told over the second course, the second half of the book of Exodus, where we went deep into understanding that what's going on there in this whole conversation around building a tabernacle and gathering all the materials and then getting clothing together for the high priest, all that stuff is the stuff of movement. That is the stuff of mission coming to fruition. That is the stuff of building the covenantal society then and now. Sinai was not the climax. It was the catalyst. And the real work really begins after the thunder and lightning and the fire on the mountain fades, when the people had to build a society rooted in purpose and in presence and in shared responsibility. Beyond Sinai is the story of how the mission becomes a movement and how the movement becomes a nation and how that becomes the covenant. The ultimate test of leadership is not what you build when you're there. It's what continues when you're not. Imagine then that Moses succeeded, that the people, the generation of the desert succeeded because they took us from vision to execution, from leadership to legacy, from Sinai to forever. That is Coaching the Bible for this week. I hope you enjoyed the series on Beyond Sinai. It was really my great pleasure to prepare it and to work through it and to build it, and then obviously to present it. Look forward to seeing you next time as we begin the third book of the 5 books of Moses, the book known in English as the book of Leviticus, in Hebrew known as the book of Vayikra. Wishing you and blessing you with the greatest and greatest of weekends ahead. Look forward to seeing you next time.